high speed, but not on the...
High speed after. Isn't technology wonderful? Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is good to be here. I figure this is my third time here. I always tell people in the congregation in Eugene, when somebody says, "What does it take to become a member here?" I said, "Show up 3 times." So, I may end up on the rolls here before I'm gone, but it is a pleasure to be here. I was joking. I come down, everybody's going, California's in this horrible crowd. It's dry, it's burning, it's terrible. I get up to go for a walk this morning and it rains on me. Really? But no, I appreciated that. It is. We're actually, weirdly enough, in Eugene, we're going through a dry period. This is going into the rainy season, but we haven't had rain in I think almost 2 weeks, and there's none predicted for the next week or so. So weird times these days, but it's my pleasure to be here and to see all of you and to get to hang out with you for a little bit. The video we were trying to play was the Speaking of Life, and one of the things that, and I don't know how much you guys have worked with the RCL, but one of the things that a lot of our churches are following along with the Revised Common Lectionary, and all that is it puts us all sort of in the same place where we're using the same scriptures that we're speaking from. We're using some of the same videos, and that way, and not just throughout GCI around the world, but through the Christian church. There's some 300 different church denominations that use some version of the RCL. So it's nice that, in churches all around the country this weekend, around the world, they will have been reading that passage from Isaiah. And pastors are going to be preaching from the passage in Luke that I'm about to speak from. And our Speaking of Life segments, which have improved, and not that I would say that if Joe were here, but not that when it was just Joe doing it, but one of the things that we really found was that our congregations, if you look at it demographically across the United States, our congregations are like 40-some% African American, and it was just really pointed out to us that Speaking of Life video that represented our denomination was always an old white guy. And so that's what we started referring to Joe as, the old white guy. But we have, when you look at how many women are involved in ministry and are part of the church, and the ethnic diversity of GCI, particularly in the United States, and so coming up with a diverse group from Michelle Fleming, who is born in the Caribbean, to Jeff Broadnack, who's African American, to Ibertikas, who's Salvadorian, to just see a diversity that's far more representative. We still get Greg, who's now the designated old white guy, but we have a real diversity there. And so the message today was out of Luke 19, but I have the technology in my phone to read Luke 19. Before we get there, anybody a Huey Lewis and the News fan in here? Okay, so it's a couple people that if I broke out into "I want a new drug," you would know that I was not just suddenly having a seizure. One of the songs that Huey Lewis put out that became actually famous because of the movie Back to the Future back in the 80s was the song "The Power of Love," and I was tempted to bring a little video clip in of it, but that wouldn't have worked either. So we're probably good I didn't do that. But there's a section in the lyrics of that song that talk about the power of love is a curious thing. It makes one man weep, makes another man sing. It changes a heart to a little white dove. It's more than a feeling. That's the power of love. And then we need a long harmonica solo. But you notice how the lyrics of that particular song talk about how love is that. It's more than a feeling. Our young people so often get caught up in the infatuation of relationships, of the feeling of relationships, and I've reached that point in my life, and I'll see it with one of my grandsons now. Is just what was the term we used when I was a kid? Twitter-pated. I mean, he has got a girlfriend, and he is just so nuts. nauseating. I just want to slap her down. But we see the emotions that go along with young love, and it's wonderful. But those of us that have been around a while know that love is so much more than just that initial infatuation. It is so much more than the, oh, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't, it's just ruining your health. Maybe you should give her up. It lasts because it is so much more than that. Love in its purest form transforms lives. It changes lives. And it's a force that is probably one of the most transformative forces that God has set into play. And we see this transformational process at work in the story of Zacchaeus. We're going to talk about a little short tax collector guy today. The story is part of it would have been in Speaking of Life, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. I got in trouble for this the other day. I was speaking somewhere, and I read the scriptures off my phone. And they're, you should be using a Bible. You need a book. I've got 27 different translations on here. But anyway, forgive me. This is how I stay in touch with the Word. But I just want to read this story to you. And this is the story of Zacchaeus. And it's in Luke 19. And I'm just going to read the first 10 verses just to set the tone for the message today. So Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Now, for what it's worth, if you're coming up from the Jordan, from the Galilee, from anywhere down in the valley, to get to Jerusalem, you go through Jericho. You go up there's other ways, but one of the common ways is up the Jericho road. And so he's passing through Jericho. And a man was there by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was the chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. And so he came down at once and he welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw this and they began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Once again, may there be a blessing on the reading of God's Word. I had an opportunity early this year to be traveling up through Jericho, up the Jericho Road, and going on into Jerusalem. And we spent some time. We had lunch in a little Palestinian. You're on the West Bank at that point. You haven't come back up in. We had lunch in a little Palestinian restaurant. Ate stuff. Not really sure what. It was good. It was kosher. Beyond that, and had hummus. But we had a great time. There are sycamore trees all over the place in Jericho, and some of those big old nasty things they date back almost. They haven't really cored one that goes all the way back to the days of Jesus, but they certainly are descendants of. From the root systems and the seeds from the sycamore trees that were there when Zacchaeus was climbing around in them. And being an idiot, I decided I was going to try and climb one of those. Slippery. If you think of a eucalyptus bark, that smooth bark, you're really describing a sycamore. And let's just say I did not get far up into a sycamore tree. There was no climbing up and looking down on anybody. It was mostly just old fat man hanging on the side of a tree and finally giving up. But it gave me a chance to get just a little bit of a perspective and setting the scene. I mean, firstly, under the Roman system, tax collecting. I mean, we're not fond of the IRS these days, but for all of the frustrations we might have with our taxes and collections and all of that, it was a totally different system under the Roman government. because collecting jobs were given to people who purchased the right to collect taxes. Collecting taxes was a business in Jesus' day. And probably a better example of comparison would be a collection agency. So you don't pay a bill, and the bill is for $1,000. And finally, the company, they sell your bill to a collection agency. And they tell the collection agency that they don't expect to get $1,000. They, maybe it's 30%, 40%, whatever it is that they expect to get. The collection agency makes their money because if they collect whatever they collect above the amount owed, they get to keep. And so that's how they pay their way. So the collection agency maybe is responsible for paying for 30% of your $1,000 bill. And maybe they give up trying to get $1,000 from you, but maybe they settle out for $700. And you're going, okay, wow, collection agency still made out quite nicely, thank you very much. Well, that's very much like the tax structure was in the first century. Tax collectors paid for the right to collect taxes. And they were contractors, but in addition to the taxes that Rome demanded, they also got to cover their expenses. They got to, they made out very, very well. And as a business owner, Zacchaeus could set taxes at a rate that covered Rome, it covered his expenses, and it covered his salary. So consequently, and then add to the fact, because if we saw in the scripture, he's not just a tax collector, he's a chief tax collector. So he's got tax collectors working underneath him. Great pyramid scheme. And he's making money from them as well. So his profit status and structure is pretty good. And Luke tells us Zacchaeus was a wealthy man. He did well as a tax collector. Now, contrary to popular opinion, the Bible does not state that Zacchaeus was dishonest. Everybody always talks about him as being this crook, that he was swindling people. But the problem is Scripture doesn't tell us that. Even Zacchaeus' statement to Jesus was an if clause. If I have been dishonest, I will pay back 4 times as much. Now the Bible does tell us that Zacchaeus was considered a sinner because of his business choice and because of his greed, which is a sin. But we don't want to write Zacchaeus off as bad as sometimes we want to do so. We can determine that Zacchaeus was more concerned about wealth than he was reputation, simply because here is a Jew working for the enemy, working for the Roman government. And so because of the career choice that Zacchaeus made, he is loathed and despised by absolutely everybody. Because the Jews, they didn't just hate being governed by Rome. That was oppressive as far as taxes, about the fact they could conscript and take anything from you. But the Roman government also interfered with their ability to worship as they chose to worship. And so add taxes on top of all of that, and a Jew who was collecting those for Rome. And it just adds fuel to the fire. And so consequently, any tax collector was presumed to be totally corrupt, totally dishonest, and a sinner. So for Jesus to call out Zacchaeus, and then to say that, hey, I'm going to hang out at your house today. You're going to feed me. We're going to eat. We're going to have a meal together. Well, that's what they come back. And they say, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Oh, my word. I mean, their muttering is putting it mildly. This is very much a, does he know? Does he understand? Now, by the way, Jesus does this often, doesn't he? He has a woman washing his feet. Everybody else in the room is going, if Jesus only knew who she was. Guess what? He did. But in this particular case, there's some other things that I really want to unpack, and hopefully they resonate with us as we look at them. The first thing I want us to see in the story is that Zacchaeus, for all of his corruption, all of whatever you can attribute to Zacchaeus was desperate to see Jesus. How do we know that? a slippery tree. He was a short man. In a race of short people, I had that fully demonstrated to me walking into a first century structure that's still standing and giving myself just one epic cranial contusion going through this stone archway. And the next thing I'm sitting on the ground and there's pretty lights, and for a little while there I could not get one eye to focus. Well, the reason was that archway was like right about here, and I wasn't paying attention. People in Jesus' day were just a lot shorter. We are a taller people. I don't know, I blame McDonald's. But anyway, no, that's the other direction, sorry. He's a short man even among short people. But he wants to see this man, Jesus. So he comes, now the mere fact that he's out, this is a rich man. This is a man who probably, imagine, I don't know, think of a rich man, think of Bill Gates, think of, everything's done for him, everything's taken care of for him. He's got an entourage that takes care of everything. Zacchaeus now is on his own. He's the one climbing the tree. He doesn't have his lackeys working for him, lifting him up on their shoulders. He was, and the mere fact that he's out in the crowd, one of the things that if you were a tax collector and you were mingling with the common people, that was a risk of like getting a blade slipped in between a rib. He's taking a risk even being out there because he wants to see this man Jesus as Jesus makes his way through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. The second thing that's so important is, while everybody's muttering, oh, now he's with a sinner, he's with that, Jesus calls Zacchaeus by name. Jericho is a pathway to Jerusalem, but all of Jesus' ministry is on the north end of the Galilee and all the areas up there. He's in and out of Jerusalem several times, but Jesus is not a regular visitor and other than passing through to the town of Jericho. Yet, he knows Zacchaeus, which implies that not only does he know Zacchaeus' name, he knows who Zacchaeus is. He knows what Zacchaeus does. He knows his story and that he works for Rome. He knows his reputation. He knows he's despised. None of this is news to Jesus. He's not going to, hey, psst, who's that short guy up in the tree? Somebody get him down out of there before he hurts himself. Jesus knows exactly who Zacchaeus is. Now the problem is that the people that are watching, that are grumbling, which are probably, some of them are probably the followers of Jesus, some of his own disciples, when they find out, what, he's a tax collector. We're going to dinner at a tax collector. Oh, this is not going to look good on social media. Nobody understands, it's clear, why Jesus was there. What Jesus' ministry was all about. Because they're grumbling. They assume Jesus is going to break control of Rome. They're expecting Jesus to come in and eventually call down heavenly armies, eventually drive this horrible occupying, power out of their land. That's what they want. They did not realize that Jesus' mission was to introduce and to show God's kingdom and how it operated. And that God's kingdom and that God's economy has a totally different set of rules. They're rules that are found entirely in love, demonstrated through grace and through mercy. Now Zacchaeus' offer, at some level, he's still trying to figure out who Jesus is. But I don't want us to miss his offer of restitution, because what does he say? He said, if I've wronged anybody, he doesn't say, boy, I've wronged a bunch of people. He said, if I've wronged anybody, if I've gone above and beyond what was legally, contractually mine, I will restore what? 4 times? Well, here's the problem. He was only by Jewish law, if he had cheated somebody, he was only required to restore the original value plus 1/5. That was Jewish law according to, that's Leviticus 6:5. All he had to do was give back what he took plus 1/5. more. That's restoration. Only premeditated and violent robbery required that you give back 4 times. That's Exodus 22:1. So Zacchaeus shows that he is willing to go above and beyond if he's cheated anyone. But then he goes even further. What does he say? He said, I'll give half of my possessions. Half of my possessions. Remember when the young rich man comes to Jesus and said, what must I do? And he says, give everything away and follow to the poor and follow me. And the young rich man's going, okay, so let's plan B. Okay, that was good. I like that. That was funny. That was funny, Jesus. Now, really, what do I have to do? Now, this man is saying, I'll give half of my wealth away. That's a bold move for a wealthy person to do. And it indicates to us that at some level, this encounter with Jesus is beginning to transform this man's life. Maybe it's what he's heard about Jesus. Maybe it's the stories that have been following ahead of Jesus, because Jesus has done some interesting things. You know, depending on when this story takes place and on which trip into Jerusalem, Jesus has been pretty famous. Jesus has been healing people and casting out demons and, doing some really cool stuff. But I have to believe that it's more than that. I have to believe it's the actual presence of Jesus himself is beginning to change this man's life. He's beginning to understand. And a lot of that probably comes from the fact that Jesus accepts him. Jesus is not caught up in the, you know who he is. Jesus says, hey, Zacchaeus, your place, lunch. We'll hang out. I'm going to stay at your house. Think of what that must have felt like to a man standing in a crowd of people that would just as soon kill him, that hated him. But isn't that what Jesus does? Doesn't Jesus walk up to a leper? A man who has to ring a bell and shout unclean and is required to cross the street whenever anybody comes. A man who has not probably been touched by another human being in years because of his leprosy. And what does Jesus do? He walks up to him and he touches him. That's what Jesus does. He's not concerned. The woman caught in adultery. Jesus asked her finally after, and I'd love to know that story. There's questions I have for Jesus. I mean, it won't be the first thing, because I'm pretty sure that in glory, seeing Jesus face to face, my concerns of, why are avocado pits so big, and what were you thinking with giraffes, and why do human knees bend this way when all other animals bend a logical way back? I'm probably not going to think of those when I'm seeing Jesus face to face, but I am hoping and praying that somewhere in eternity, I can just kind of take Jesus aside and say, what did you write on the ground? I want to know. I really want to know. Because I have my own personal theory. There's a group of men that have got, now by the way, Jewish law says that you can't accuse a woman unless the man is caught with her. And guess what? There's no man here. So already they don't have a leg to stand on, and we must kill her, which by the way, they did not have the authority to do. But nevertheless, they're trying to trick Jesus. And then Jesus writes on the sand. And he could have written a bunch of things. He could have written scripture passages. I'm thinking he's just writing women's names and dates. Maria, Friday night. And suddenly one of these men are going, I just remembered. I gotta be my theory, 3 Timothy gospel, but it's nevertheless, I have to wonder. But this is what Jesus does. Jesus calls out to Zacchaeus. He calls him by name, and he is not caught up in the drama that everybody else is. And I have to believe that that is what begins the transformation, that beautiful demonstration of love and acceptance, because Jesus makes it clear, not only here but in so many different places, that everyone belongs, regardless of career choices or mistakes that they have made or places that they have stumbled, it is. And I can't tell you, as a pastor over the years, how many times I've had somebody tell me, Pastor, I'd love to come to church, but I really don't belong there. And I go, yeah, no, you do. You go, no, if you only knew. How many times do people do that to God? When they're hearing that clear call from Jesus, but they're going, oh, Jesus, if you only knew. And it's stories like this that say, yeah, Jesus knew Zacchaeus. He knew the woman caught in adultery. He knew every situation, and he doesn't care. Jesus says that Zacchaeus is a son of Abraham. Oh, that must have just frosted the Jews standing around there. Because what Jesus just did is he said, hey, by the way, this man, maybe he put his arm around him. I don't know. Short man. Anyway, Jesus said, Zacchaeus is family. He's the same bloodline as us, the same heritage and calling as us. He's one of us. Yeah, he may be a brother who chose a despised career. Maybe he did cheat. Maybe he did steal. Maybe you're one of the people that he just took too much. And it cost you something. A crop, a house, whatever. Whatever he did, he's one of us. And then Jesus states his mission for these people that really are pretty clueless. And when you read the stories, most of the people that followed Jesus were not the sharpest crayons in the box of Crayolas. I'm sorry. They really did not catch and figure out most of this. But then Jesus states his mission. And he says, basically, contrary to what the crowd thought, Jesus' mission was not to become the king, conquering king of Israel, throwing out the Roman government and setting up a government that they were familiar with, that they would have liked, which would have been just as oppressive. Because if you take a look at Jewish structure, the Romans were bad. Let's be quite honest. What they had turned God's laws and rules into, and the commands and the structure and what they did, they weren't much better than the Romans. But they thought that they were going to get a new king. And Jesus tells them that his mission was to seek out and save the lost. Jesus is looking to a crowd of Jews and going, I'm not really here just for you. I'm here for this short guy over here. I'm here to seek and save. And by the way, Zacchaeus isn't yelling at Jesus. He isn't going, hey, up here, yeah, the guy looks like Joe Pesci. Yep, no. Jesus sought out Zacchaeus. Seek and save the lost. By showing how all people are valuable in God's sight. Not just the cool ones, not just the rich ones, not just the religiously perfect ones. But those that stumble, those that have a story, those that have a past. Jesus wasn't ushering in a system that was based on law and structure. He was ushering in a system that was based on grace, not merit. You don't earn it. You can't earn it. You can't disqualify yourself from it. He chose to spend time with those marginalized by the culture that they lived in. The women, the poor, those who were despised by others for a whole bunch of reasons, because the Jews are real big on despising others. They are to this day. Wandering through the old city of Jerusalem was truly a blessing and an experience. But do not get in the way of an Orthodox Hasidic Jew who will push you out of the street to walk by because you're Goyim, you're Gentile. You are not one of them, so therefore you are not worthy of a simple shliach, which is just, excuse me. They were worse in Jesus' day. And he's saying, no. Now I'm going to hang out with the ones you guys despise. I'm going to hang out with the ones that reach out to the ones that you reject. Those that have made mistakes. He honored those the culture said were nobodies. Because let's face it, and this is the thing that we celebrate, that we take great joy in, and that is the fact that in God's economy, there are no I just want to leave you with a little application on this. What do we do with this? Because if we understand that transformation can only happen in the context of a loving acceptance of a person, not where we want them to be, but where they are right now. I learned that lesson as a pastor many, many, many years ago. I had the opportunity, I had just stepped into another church, and I found that every success I had had in my previous congregation failed in this new church. They looked at me like I had four heads, couldn't understand why I was suggesting this. That's the dumbest idea, pastor, we've ever heard. Well, my last church, they thought it was the greatest. And I had an opportunity at a conference, Eugene Peterson, the writer of the Message Bible, wise old pastor. And I had an opportunity to have lunch with him. Spent an hour with the man who wrote the Bible. That was really cool. And at some point, while I was complaining about my new congregation, this wise old man did the wise old man move. Everybody knows the wise old man move, right? It's a goatee. He didn't have a full beard, but it was a goatee. And he looked at me and he interrupted me and he said, Tim, it seems to me that you're letting the church you want get in the way of the church God gave you. I got back from lunch. My wife wanted to know how it went. I told her to shut up. Leave me alone. But don't we do that? Don't we do that with individuals? Rather than accepting who God has put into our pathway, into our relationship, into our family, through the doors of our church, rather than accepting them for who they are, we want them to be who we want them to be. Don't we do that? Billy Graham, though, made a great statement. I've never been was not a big Billy Graham fan. I mean, I have a respect for the man, but I didn't. I remember years and years ago, Billy Graham came on the TV. We had an old black and white TV. We had what we used to call it redneck stereo. We had the old stereo cabinet TV down below that the picture didn't work anymore, but the speakers did. And so we had the other TV sitting up on top of it, the cheap one, and we listened to it. You had to change both channels simultaneously. You know, there were only 3 of them, so it wasn't that hard. I am that old. But Billy Graham came on the TV, and the TV, we've been having problems with it anyway, but my dad walked over and turned it off, and he got back to his seat, and it came back on again. Switch was bad, but he walked back over, turned it off, stood there, it came back on. Middle of the Billy Graham crusade. My dad walked around and unplugged it, and he said, if it comes back on, we're changing churches. Billy Graham, though, made one of the most profound statements, and when he talks about, because a lot of times the song that they play at a Billy Graham crusade is just as I am, without one plea as you come to. And he said, that's the great thing about the God we have. He accepts every one of us just as we are. But he also loves us enough not to leave us there. Yes. And that's what we see in the story of Zacchaeus. So we have to ask ourselves the question when we come across a Zacchaeus in our life. Are we willing to say, hey, I want to hang out with you. Let's have lunch. I want to get to know you better. I want you to get to know me better. I want you to get to know who I know really well. Are we able in our relationships to put loving acceptance first and leave the job of transformation to God in His perfection and His timing, rather than thinking it's somehow our job? How would it impact your relationship with family, with coworkers, church members, if we treated everybody the way Jesus treats Zacchaeus? What would that look like? We had a young lady, she actually lives down here now in Long Beach. She's taking classes, getting her doctorate. Young lady that attended in the Eugene congregation. Interesting young woman. Her head was shaved except for this blue streak over here. She was gender fluid. If you don't know what that means, don't ask me to explain it. She wanted us to use plural pronouns, and that's just odd. But she was welcome. She came. And I asked her one time, I said, Michelle, I said, She was finishing up her degree in religious studies and psychology at the university. And, but I knew she was an agnostic, because she told everybody she was an agnostic. And so I asked her one time, I said, Michelle, we love the fact that you're here. We welcome you, you're one of us. But I had to ask you, my exact words, what the hell are you doing here? She said, you're an agnostic. She said, no, because of you, I'm a hopeful agnostic. Okay, I study comparative religious studies, but I don't know what a hopeful agnostic is. She told me, she said, I don't believe in God, but I hope I'm wrong.
I like that.
I said, so then why are you here? She said, because you guys will accept and love and welcome a gender fluid, hopeful agnostic, and maybe one of your family. That's the difference. And I had the chance to share that story. I live on planes. That's what I do. This flight was like my 52nd flight since January. Usually it's because it takes me 4 planes to get to anywhere. But I have a young U of O student sitting next to me. He's flying down here because the Oregon Ducks are playing somebody somewhere down here. And I was supposed to know that, and I didn't, and I just lowered way down in his eyes. But I'm used to earbuds. Get on a plane, earbuds, don't make eye contact, don't want to talk to people. So I watch movies. I've seen every Marvel movie there is. What did I watch the last fight? Aladdin. This young man wanted to talk. But then he asked the question. I hate the question, because I never know what the reaction is going to be. So, sir, what do you do for a living? I'm a pastor. I'm a pastor can get somebody moving to another seat. It gets the earbuds in faster than you can imagine. Or they have to tell you why they hate organized religion. And then I tell them that you should join my church. Nobody's ever accused us of being organized. Or they feel the need to confess. This young man hit me with the, so, you probably believe in a 6,000-year-old earth and Noah's flood and this and that and the other thing, and he kept on going on, and I finally looked at him and I said, no, I'm this and I'm that, and I don't interpret that way, and I see that as metaphor, and yeah, I know, you don't have to check your brain at the door to walk into our church. And I told him the story of Michelle, the woman I just spoke to you of. We talked the entire flight in LAX. The young man was in tears because he did not know that Christians like that existed, because his experience had been that they want you to change the second you walk through the door, and we'll accept you if you do this. We will love you if you do that. And it just blew them away that we exist, that we love people unconditionally, that everybody is somebody in God's kingdom, that everyone matters, that everyone has a place and has a purpose, and that we cannot judge a person's contributions or value because everyone is invaluable in God's sight, that all are included and are loved. So as we consider the transformation of Zacchaeus' heart, we're reminded that love and acceptance create the conditions for transformation to occur, and that transformation comes from God, within the person, not from concerned onlookers from the outside. Was the line in the song, the power of love is a curious thing. But the effect of loving acceptance can be far-reaching and can be life-changing. Amen? While I'm here and while I'm up here on the microphone, I'm kind of sorry that